What is up? Welcome to another video, and today we get to dive in. We're gonna start slow, but hopefully this video won't be too long. You can look and see how long it is. I don't know how long it's gonna be, but why I'm so excited is because we're gonna start getting into my passion, the thing that I love to study the most, food. I sure do like learning about food. So before we get started into just some of the, we're just going to look at some of the basic top level, just the very basics of stuff before we dive in to some deeper things. But before we get started, I just want to I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've been doing. So I got to thinking about the Passover and the idea of getting rid of all the leaven and what that means for us, what it means for how that would have worked and how God wanted it to work. So there is some evidence, that Israel would sell their sourdough starters or their starters, whatever you want to call them, to their neighbors during Passover, and then they'd buy them back right after Passover. And I wonder if this is actually the intent of what God wants us to do when he says to get rid of all the leaven. I mean, is it kind of cheating a little bit to sell it to someone and buy it back? In other words, you're not really getting rid of it. You're just letting somebody hold it for you, right? So I started thinking, well, what would it look like if we actually threw out our sourdough starters? Well, first of all, you'd have to start a new sourdough starter every single year, or you'd have to buy a new starter every single year. So your bread's always going to taste different. Like every year, your bread is going to taste different. In some ways, it's gonna the bread isn't gonna taste exactly the same. Sourdough starters aren't hard to make. It takes about 7 days, and this is another question that comes up. So if I throw my sourdough starter away, when am I allowed to start making another sourdough starter? Technically speaking, the leaven inside of it wouldn't actually be fully ready to go until about 6-7 days, something like that, depending on your heat level. And so then the question is, okay, well, am I buying a starter from a neighbor? Even if I throw mine out, am I buying a starter from a neighboring country? Were there non-Israelites lining up the day Passover was over to sell sourdough starters to Israel? Or do we start building a sourdough starter the day that Passover ends? Well, if this is the case, then we really don't have bread that's not unleavened. We don't have bread for another 7 days. So you're looking at 14 days in total without leavened bread. These are all things that you have to start to think about. And so I've started actually making bread. I made a sourdough starter, and I've started making bread. I'm making bread almost every day now. And I'm doing this as an experiment to just see what it would be like to try to get rid of a starter each year, and then to try to have to make a new one, and what that entails and how that looks and all that. Should I just buy one from someone after Passover's over, and we'll figure all this out when Passover comes. The thing I'm really interested in doing is actually making bread without a starter. And what does that look like? You don't have to, it's so much faster, right? You don't have to let it rise. Sourdough is really making bread that rises like that is really a time-intensive thing. It's not labor-intensive, it's time-intensive. So I'm actually working with different ways to make sourdough to see how, and just bread in general with a starter, to see how quick I can get it to, I'm tweaking different ways to do it. Anyway, so I'm saying a lot just to basically, these are some of the things that are going on in my mind as I'm creating this bread and making bread. So if you have, come bake bread with me. I've thought about actually making some tutorials on baking bread so that we could all kind of do it together, and I could show you how I'm doing it and what I'm doing and some of the things I'm experimenting with. And then at Passover time, we all get rid of our starters and we make unleavened bread, and then the process of coming back. So coming back to leavened bread and what that would look like. So anyway, it's just an idea. But anyway, let's jump into today. So like I said, some very surface level things, some very just on the surface level. If you followed me at all and heard my discussions of the Eucharist or of the Lord's Supper or of meals in general, you know that I have taken a significant amount from, there's a number of scholars, and we'll get into these scholars. Dennis Smith wrote what I would consider to be the standard book when it comes to modern day meals in the Greco-Roman meal. Now, once again, people are going to say, why in the world would you study meals in the Greco-Roman world? And I think that you'll see exactly why I would study such a thing and why that's my focus of study. Ultimately, Dennis Smith argues in his book, From Symposium to Eucharist, he argues that every meal in the ancient world, particularly from 300 BCE up to 300 CE, that the banquets were all based on the same kind of banquet tradition. So, whether or not you were pagan, whether or not you were Jewish, whether or not you were Christian, you all basically adhered to the same kind of banquet tradition. And there might be a couple of things that are changed here or there, but they all followed the basic structure. And we see this even today, right? We see this in our modern culture a little bit. You might have, I mean, what are some good examples? You might have a formal dinner party, or you might have a fundraising banquet, or you might have a pizza party, a football pizza party. Okay, all these things, like when you go to these, like if I get invited to a Super Bowl pizza party, like a Super Bowl party, and I know there's going to be food there, I know there's going to be pizza or whatever, I know it's going to follow the same structure. We're all going to watch the game. We're all going to be able to eat, basically however we want to. It's very informal. There's nothing formal about it. If I go to a black tie fundraising dinner, I know that it's going to probably cost a lot of money. I need to wear something very nice. It's very formal. There's an order to things. There's going to be someone who's leading the dinner, so on and so forth. So all of these things, even in our modern culture, our meals kind of are dictated by the culture around us. If I have somebody over for dinner, depending on who the person is, it's going to change the meal. And this is actually kind of what I want to talk about today. So anyway, all of this goes back to what we would consider the symposium. The symposium is like the banquet structure that comes into the the ancient 300 BCE to the 300 CE, and kind of structures all banquets, all dinners. Dinner in biblical, like the apostolic scripture time, the New Testament. The Greek word is deipnon, and so you've probably heard me use the word deipnon many times. Deipnon just means dinner. So it'll be translated in your Bibles as dinner, and it can mean either just maybe you're sitting down with your family to have a deipnon, which would be a dinner time meal, or maybe you're having a deipnon, which would be like a symposium-like banquet meal. Okay, so these are some of the words that we need to know. Symposium, deipnon, right? These are things that are going, artos is going to be another one, artos meaning bread, which also can refer to just food. So, and this gets really, really important, artos, and the idea of bread as food. This becomes very, very important in some of our later discussions, and you'll see why as we move along with these things. So, every single meal that a person had, even within the family, followed structures. And I'll show this in a different video, but basically, anytime there was meat on the table, it was a meal of worship. And I think that we see this specifically in some of the Jewish writings, right? The Jews were not allowed to eat with Gentiles. Why? Well, I think it's because they saw Gentiles as being pagans. Even if they said that they were Jewish, or that they were following the God of Israel, there was a chance that they were probably following other gods, and so the Jews wouldn't want to eat with Gentiles. We see this in Jubilees; it's completely forbidden. We see this in Galatians, right? In Galatians 2, Peter, he's associating with the Gentiles, and he pulls away. Paul excoriates him for this, and his vision, Peter's vision in Acts 10. So on and so forth. So you're starting, like, even as I'm talking, I hope that you're starting to see that all of these, like the idea of meals in the Greco-Roman world, is actually very important, and it frames a lot of what we want to the cultural aspect of what we're seeing. I'll show you this. So my main point here today is actually showing you status within the deipnon. Now, so several things. First of all, within the Greco-Roman meals, the deipnons and the symposiums and whatnot, people were chosen by status. In other words, if I was going to have a banquet, if I was going to have a dinner, and I was going to invite people in, I would invite people according to status. So the people who would come in would be ranked according to status, where they sat. So triclinia, which is the like these dining halls, they had these couches essentially, and the couches where people would recline at table. People who reclined at table were usually free people. So if you were free, you would always recline at table. Women didn't recline at table, and servants usually didn't recline at table either. Like you wouldn't see your servants reclining at a table; that would be inappropriate. And so this becomes very important as we start to look at things like the Last Supper and how they're discussing their rank and like who's the most important, who's going to be at the right hand, who's gonna be glorified, where they're going to sit, all these kind of things. These become very important. Some people might argue, well, this is the disciples and Yeshua, they weren't concerned about Greco-Roman customs. They weren't concerned about these deipnons, and this can be easily disproven, and we'll go to some text for it. So once again, we see things like just as a general overview, just so you can kind of understand the background of this. So people reclined at table. This was customary. This came before any Jewish idea of like the reclining at table for the Passover. I think that it was the other way around. I think the Jews used the tradition of reclining at table and gave it a meaning. Dipping. There were communal bowls, so the servants would bring communal bowls out. They would lay them in front of people. Everyone would then scoop out of the communal bowls and eat out of the communal bowls. So when Yeshua says the hand that is dipping with mine is the one who will betray me, and is Judas. This, once again, they're just following standard cultural practice of a deipnon and a symposium. Okay. And then there was usually entertainment. Sometimes there was, flute players. A lot of times in the Greco-Roman world, there was prostitutes. There are all sorts of different things that might be. There was also the philosophical banquets. In the philosophical banquets, there would be somebody who would get up and would give a presentation, a philosophical idea, and then maybe there was discussion. We see a little bit. This is possibly what's going on in John at the Last Supper, right? We see that Yeshua stands up, and from, I think, 13 all the way through 17, Yeshua's giving a discourse. And so this would actually fall naturally into the deipnon customs of the first century. There was always bread and wine that was broken, and it was broken unto a god. Whether or not that was the Jews were breaking bread and blessing it unto Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, or whether or not it was pagans that had a specific god that they wanted to honor at their meal. This was just a standard practice that you would do, and this becomes very important when we get into Eucharistic studies in the Last Supper in Luke 22 and 1 Corinthians 10 and 11. Okay, so all of this to say, let's just get back to status within the deipnon and the symposium. The reason that this is so vitally important is because Yeshua breaks the norm on this. He actually breaks first century tradition. You would wanted the people that you invited to your deipnon, the people that you invited to your banquet. It showed your status. So the higher the status of the people that came was the higher the status that you were. Like guilt by association, right? So if you have, and we see this even today, right? Like, if you have a friend and your friend is constantly going out with, senators and governors and the president of the United States, they have clout, they have power, right? But if your friend is constantly having people over and they're prostitutes and they're drunkards, clearly that's not on par with the person who is having the governors and the president at their golf club all the time or whatever, right? So same kind of thing. But even more, this was woven into the fabric of the first century culture, were these meals and who you had. And if you were invited to specific people's house for a deipnon, then this showed a sense of honor and a sense of who you were in society. And you could go up and down in society depending on where you were status-wise at deipnons. And so this is not only important, but it also, we see Yeshua actually talking about these things in the scriptures. Let's kick over to our Bible here. So this is in Luke. Luke is very heavy on meal traditions, and this is in Luke 14:7 is where I'm at, and following. He has several stories in a row that deal with the Deipnon. Okay, so Luke 14:7 is where I'm starting now. He told a parable to those who were invited when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this person. And then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So once again, Yeshua is kind of flipping the cultural norms on their head in this instance when he's saying, look, don't look for the best place, the best seat in the house. Don't look for the most honor. In fact, go the opposite direction. Look for the least honor, and then you may actually be, you might be moved up in rank, and that will show honor to everyone else. So, but this is just fully focused on the meal tradition of the time and the way that these banquets were structured. But he goes on. There's another parable here. So down here, the parable of the great banquet. Once again, we're fully immersed here in first century banquet tradition. In Luke 14:12, he says also to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, and of course this word right here, this is Ariston, and then this banquet right here is Deipnon. Okay, so when you give a dinner or a banquet, a Deipnon, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. This is completely and totally contrary to the cultural ideas of the first century. Why in the world would I want to bring in, cripples and lepers and all the, like, why would I want to bring all these people into my banquet? This would actually diminish me in society's view. In fact, this would go contrary to what people would want to do, just in life generally, right? You want to build yourself up. But what Yeshua is saying is, no. What we want to do here is we want to, we don't want to be repaid. And this, once again, is a cultural aspect of the Deipnon. If I was to invite, 10 people that I knew, and maybe I knew them well, or maybe whatever it was, maybe I invite them to a Deipnon, maybe I know half of them really well, and some of them are just acquaintances, but they're high up in status. Okay, so they come over, I have these 10 people over. The idea is that when they have a Deipnon, I'm going to be invited to their Deipnon as well. And this is how we would move up status within the first century Greco-Roman world, is that I would continue to build my status within society by going to these banquets and being placed in certain seats and being seen as like important enough, not only to be there, but to be in a specific seat there. So once again, as we get into some of the more important aspects of the scriptures themselves, we'll see that seat placement is very important. It's not just important to the society around. It's very important to the disciples. It's very important to the people in that culture. And even though Yeshua has already given this parable, it doesn't seem to sway the disciples from, they don't get the message. They're not quite understanding. Either that, or maybe they got the message, but they think it might not apply because they're with Yeshua, right? We also get into the idea that Yeshua lowers himself to a servant. This is like to serve the people. He takes himself out of the banquet at the Last Supper. He takes himself out of the banquet, and he does the job of the servant. This is unheard. Why would you, this is completely unheard of. You wouldn't do that. And not only that, but the servants and the women they ate somewhere else. They weren't allowed to eat in the Deipnon with the men. So like just the idea that he would lower himself in status to the servant is really a proclamation of what we as believers are supposed to do. Okay, I've talked long enough for this video. I'm going to be back next week with another video, and we're going to keep going with these little things. I got some great emails from people asking specific questions about meal customs, and I want to get to those questions, but I also want to build up specifically to these questions so when I'm using language and these concepts, people are they're on board with me. They know what I'm talking about. They know why I'm using these concepts and whatnot. So anyway, if you have any questions about what I've said, or if you want receipts for any of it, not a problem at all. You can shoot me an email. My email address is chagatorresource.com. That's the easiest one to get a hold of me. And yeah, I guess that's going to do it. Keep sending your questions, by the way, about the Deipnon. The 1 Corinthians 10:11 passage, we're going to get into that. I haven't actually, full disclosure, I haven't fully studied it the way that I should. I've studied it, but I haven't studied it so in depth that I've come to my full conclusions yet. I have ideas, but as we go along, I'm going to be researching, and I'm going to be solidifying my ideas, and then I'm going to be doing some presentations at some various congregations here shortly, and I hope to be able to present those things to you as well. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your support, and I will see you in the next video.